saying you don't get it, this and no, like you don't get it, and no, this isn't it. I think Mike and I both felt, okay, we've said no a lot, but we're in such a, especially around the time that we decided to sit down and really write it, like we have to have a place to pivot for one, but also the industry, I'll put a little blame on the industry as well, just to keep things spicy today, but we kept talking about everything as financial, right? We say wallets, we say DeFi, we say all of these things. So what government policymakers, regulators here is, oh, we create a financial system without you guys. And we really wanted to both of it to say, here's a different way to regulate, but also regulate based on what this is, which is a communications and an accounting system, not a totally new financial system that is a bank that just decided we're not going to follow government regulations.
We'll come back to the distinction between communication system and a bank. First, I wanted to say that in my observation, one of the obstacles to more meaningful conversation about some of these things has been the lack of agreed upon definitions, starting with some of the basic terms, decentralization right at the top. The paper uses the term genuine DeFi to distinguish between systems that truly don't have an intermediary. For instance, the core of Tornado Cash is a set of smart contracts that no single entity owns or controls, from systems that still rely on a human operator of some kind. Either one of you can start here, and maybe you both can help answer this question. But on a technical level, what constitutes genuine DeFi?
Great question. We took ourselves a little bit out of that equation and relied upon a scholarly paper that came before ours that distinguished between DeFi and on-chain CeFi. There's obviously been a lot of criticisms about DeFi saying, well, it's not truly decentralized and it's decentralized in name only, or saying things like decentralization theater. And so there had been this very powerful distinction in the paper called on DeFi and on-chain CeFi, and they made the distinction by saying, look, there are some of these smart contract-based systems that still rely on intermediaries in some way, and then there's just the pure technological infrastructure. And so we made that distinction also to be able to answer some of the criticisms in the U.S. Treasury report that came out on DeFi, saying, well, all of this is still going to be, considered FIs that are subject to the BSA because there's no decentralization. So we really wanted to make sure that protocols didn't have to become FIs, because it's sort of an impediment to moving forward.
Anything to add there?
I would say the other thing is we intentionally stayed away from defining decentralization, and maybe Mike has a lot to add here, because one, it's so charged. Two, again, there is no generally accepted definition of decentralization. Maybe different bits and pieces come together. But three, we really wanted to focus on, as Mike alluded to before, things that policymakers were already familiar with. So things like the 2019 FinCEN guidance and the critical infrastructure overlay and things like that.
You mentioned that guidance from FinCEN, and Peter mentioned the idea of independent control of funds in his talk, and kind of alluded to maybe some confusion around that term. Let's zoom in on that, though. What does it mean? What do you guys say that it means to have independent control, and sort of why did you land on that language?
Well, I'll start, because I think like Rebecca said, we didn't want to come out from nowhere. Like, the whole point of this was to change the conversation with policymakers, and so we built upon the 2019 guidance from FinCEN because it had been out there. It had opportunity to be changed or amended or corrected, and it hadn't been. It was largely seemed non-controversial with policymakers, and so. And by the way, with respect to Judge Bahia, she's a judge, I'm not. But FinCEN did and has and continues to rely on the 2019 guidance and cite it in administrative rulings, which do have the effect of law, certainly for the parties involved. But And so from our perspective, it was reliable, and we thought it functionally worked. It was very deliberate when we were working up the guidance at FinCEN to focus on total independent control, because this isn't about custody. Custodianship it might be an SEC thing, but it's not a money services thing. And the idea is, do you have an ability to independently execute a transaction or stop a transaction indefinitely for somebody? And to be really specific, as Peter laid out, it's accepting and transmitting value that substitutes for currency. And so there's an acceptance and a transmission, and it's very specific in the regulations and the law. And so the idea was, if you don't have that control, you're not. There's lots of places that are involved in the transmission of funds, including Comcast every day, and GoDaddy, who's hosting the B of A website, or whoever. But we don't turn them into a financial institution. And so the idea was, let's use something that's recognizable, and then build upon that, and find ways to do it better, like genuinely. It wasn't just sort of to shift it.
Mm-hmm. Just for the non-crypto folks in the room, who might not understand how a blockchain transaction happens, let's try to stay at a high level if we can, but where would someone be able to exert independent control, aside from the obvious sort of standing in the middle of the transaction, or where are we looking exactly in the transaction to figure out if someone has independent control?
That's a great question. As a lawyer, I'll say it depends. But also, all joking aside, I mean, we did not focus on the base layer in this paper very intentionally. I think Mike and I deeply believe, and there's a footnote in the paper, that the base layer should remain credibly neutral. However, if you have a fully permissioned base layer, there is a permissioning into and out of the system that does allow somebody to affect third-party value, right? You could not let somebody out of the system and then their value is locked. But we really focused on the application layer, and there's a little graphic, I wish we had it for up here, that goes through it. But you could do it at really any part of the system, right? If there's some sort of custodial back end to a wallet, I assume you have control there. If you have permissioning around an app, right? People definitely looked at, could we build permissioned DeFi? There's going to be control there. And the definition in the paper of total independent control is really broad. It captures basically any ability to affect third-party value. Now, that doesn't mean, and we were really explicit, that anybody who has total independent control as a financial institution has to comply with the BSA. The question is two parts, which is, one, do you have total independent control? And two, if yes, are you engaged in activities of a financial institution and thus need to do it? The on-chain CeFi paper that we relied on made the point that if you have control, you are probably more likely to be subject to some regulation, but neither that paper nor we took an explicit position on what regulation would apply, because holding keys to an administrative key that are only used in the case of an emergency doesn't make you an FI. So there's definitely more nuance on that, and probably can be expanded out by other people in a different paper.
One thing we've been circling around here is that the argument is essentially that these are not banks, that they shouldn't be regulated as banks or financial institutions, and instead should be regulated as communication systems, or looked at as communication systems by policymakers. You've mentioned the BSA a couple times. That stands for the Bank Secrecy Act. What is the significance of the distinction here in practice, and how would that help manage the risk of illicit finance better?
Well, I mean, I think the idea of it managing risk better is that the Bank Secrecy Act was specifically for banks coming out of the 1970s, when the FBI would go to a bank because usually it was some form of organized crime that was tax evading and money laundering and sending money to Swiss banks. The FBI would show up and the bank would say, I don't know, I don't have any records. And so it started with, you need to keep records so that when we show up, there's information about which Swiss bank you sent it to, et cetera, and who your actual customer was, and that sort of thing. Over time, it expanded to, well, and actually you should tell us in advance sending it to FinCEN, the Financial Intelligence Unit, if you see suspicious activity that we should be aware of, but with a pretty specific threshold around that. They've sort of kept the threshold the same, so it's not inflation adjusted. But so a lot more gets reported than originally, but it really was about the fact that, first of all, no one bank can see what other activities coming at them or moving in the system. It's totally opaque silos. So banks themselves have a difficulty managing the risk of what's coming in the whole system. And then obviously law enforcement has a hard time not just investigating cases, but in the, at least especially the more modern instance of FinCEN, like using suspicious activity reports to put out alerts so that like we were constantly aggregating, okay, this is the new way that elder fraud is happening because all these different banks are filing suspicious activity reports. We've aggregated the newest threat indicators and we're disseminating them across to every bank out there and every community bank so that you now see how people are being exploited. This is the new identity theft that's happening. During COVID, I think we put out 15 alerts on like this is the newest COVID fraud that's happening that's exploiting people's identities or taking people's economic funding. And so the idea was there's so much opacity, we need to collect this information, you need to collect it first and then send certain things to us so that we can help people protect themselves. And I think our concept was, well, we don't have opaque silos here. We have an enormous amount of public ledger, very accessible data. I won't say transparent because we want to protect people with privacy, and I think, Mike, you were one of the first people to fully tie the paper to privacy itself, which is really where it's headed. And we try not to say transparent in the paper, actually. We say publicly accessible much more, because I think that's the point. There's a lot of ways to manage risk that doesn't just keep the shades off of Clearville. And so the idea was the Bank Secrecy Act is doing this thing. We don't have that same problem. And there are ways for people to detect the risk without collecting it and sending it in. In fact, the Security Alliance and SEAL is doing all sorts of information dissemination around this, leveraging the public accessibility of the information. So just like critical infrastructure, which has long been an entity that Treasury has managed through the Office of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection, who has long recognized that, yes, Amazon, AWS Cloud, Cisco routers, there's all sorts of communications protocols that underlie the multi-trillion-dollar financial system, and they're really important, and they need to do cybersecurity, and we do alerts to them all the time. So it should be protected and helping get information out to people to help protect themselves, but it doesn't mean that they should all become banks.
Yeah, and look, I'll say the quiet part out loud, which I sort of alluded to before. The BSA is not effective anymore. Maybe it was in the 1970s when banks are smaller, and maybe you have other things you want to say about that. But it's not as effective as I think we want it to be, or it's not meeting its purpose now. And even regulators understand that a new digital, forget blockchain on its own, but a new digital system is emerging, and there are better ways, right? KYC is very fractured. You can go through one bank's KYC and it'll spit out one thing, and a different bank's KYC and it'll spit out another, and they don't talk to each other. And given all the SARs incoming to FinCEN, they can't necessarily always aggregate them together and get all the information. So we really wanted to leverage some of the I'll say transparency that's out there, not on its own, but to aggregate the tools that are based on having traceability and public access to information to try to build out a better, more effective system.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing on that, because I think it's really important that the effectiveness piece is that Rebecca's talking about is something that FinCEN itself has repeatedly said. There's been repeated rulemaking saying, we think the BSA needs to be updated. We think there's better ways to do this. We brought in a digital identity advisor and did a whole initiative on privacy because too many people's information was being exploited. The Evolve Bank, 33 terabytes of personal information. Well, forget Elizabeth Warren's political instincts, from a law enforcement perspective, the law enforcement folks don't want any of that happening either. FBI is not looking for more cases. They're good. They got plenty. So does justice. So our take at FinCEN and working with law enforcement and Department of Justice was actually it'd be better to prevent victims than just be able to chase the bad guys better. And so brought in a digital identity person to rethink KYC, and brought in privacy folks, actually from Electric Coin Company, came in, Monero, engaged with Monero, engaged with Dash, Matt Green from Hopkins. We brought in cryptographers to say, how do we do this better so that people aren't just sending everybody's social security number around, and find ways to use zero-knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption, and empower people to protect themselves, because we are never going to have enough police, FBI, prosecutors, and FinCEN enforcement people to catch all the bad guys. Let's empower people to protect themselves. And also, Amin's here and has done some incredible work on this, but allow people to disassociate with bad guys rather than go in and tell them, here's who you can't associate with.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to keep going on this point, but I think what Mike raised is a really important one, and this really goes to the privacy question, but I would say maybe the most controversial part of the paper is this proposal to have a new category of actors that have additional or enhanced financial integrity requirements, and those are people who are necessary to the flow of communications about these financial transactions. But what we didn't do there is make them FIs and collect personal information. But what we did do there is look at, can you leverage a lot of this publicly accessible data? How do you do it? And instead of saying, oh, we're going to leverage it and then we're going to pass it on to somebody and fingers crossed that it gets pulled out of a SAR and that we can then pass it on to either DOJ or FBI or whatever and to do further investigation, which may take weeks, months, years, this is sort of an immediate way that has nothing to do with personal identity, social security name, even jurisdiction, where you will block really high risk transactions in real time. And then yes, send also information that is not personal information, but transaction hashes, times, and things like that. And we did it because it's very different than what the traditional system demands today, and we wanted it to be highly effective.
In the paper, you propose new rules for a couple of different government entities. And Mike, you mentioned CISA a few minutes ago. That's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And then there's the Treasury's Office of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection, which is OSIP. I think you started to get into this a little bit, but how exactly would you propose that these agencies get in the mix and sort of help out to manage these risks?
Yeah, we've talked to OSIP and CISA, by the way, and they get it right away, because again, this is not new to them that there's critical infrastructure underlying the financial system. So for them, there wasn't much required. They don't have the resources to do a lot more, but from an authority standpoint, this is most of the way they operate right now is cooperative and collaborative. It's not coercive. So we really don't need to create more sticks with them. I worked with them quite a bit, and when you would call the back end folks at Goldman Sachs or Cisco and say, we think we have an attack vector from DPRK, they'd be like, great, let's come in right now. It wasn't, can you talk to my lawyer and send a subpoena and I'll let you know if it works. And that creates the sort of virtuous cycle of information sharing. So there's not a lot that you would need to do, but it would be a different way of feeding information into the system, in the way that OSIP, CISA, and FinCEN were all putting out different versions of alerts on ransomware and cybersecurity fraud and elder fraud and infrastructure attacks. And so it is creating the information sharing network is needed, and that's already being done, by the way, right now. The security alliance with SEAL, MITRE's working on this with Treasury. This is already happening, because this is again where the actual law enforcement people that got into this because they didn't like seeing people being exploited already get it. That the faster we can not only get the risk information out there to people, but also empower people to protect themselves rather than waiting to call the police and have us show up at everybody's fucking door. We just don't have enough people for that. And so their idea is let's get this information out there. And by the way, if there's an attack loading a smart contract up to do an exploit, FBI doesn't care if it's Fancy Bear, Lazarus, or just some dude in his basement. They want you to stop it to prevent you from getting attacked and them have yet another case to do. So nobody wants to allow a protocol to create a SAR, send it through legal, and within 30 days from detecting it, send it to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, who then disseminates it out, and then they put an alert that gets cleared through Main Treasury, and in 4 years, you get an alert that comes out. Like, they'd much rather prevent it to begin with, and that's really the focus here is you don't need to be doing KYC on every single attacker. We actually just need the risk indicators out there as fast as we possibly can so that people can prevent it from happening.
Yeah, and Mike and I had the opportunity a few times to speak to the FBI about the framework, and one of the things they talked to us about is how hard it is, even when they identify a risk, to go and get a freeze order and then send it to the right people. Then they have to check with their lawyers, and then it takes and like maybe the funds aren't even there to freeze anymore, which is this actually a lot of the parts of the proposal, especially this idea of the critical communications transmitters, will make it so that forget transactions can't go through Tornado Cash. They also, if they're super high risk, can't go peer-to-peer. And the other thing about this that I think Treasury has been struggling with when you're in permissionless systems is, well, how do we have extraterritorial reach? And this means you don't even have to really think about it as long as the critical communications transmitter at least has to have the assumption that U.S. persons are coming through it. And so you don't have to expand extraterritorial reach to get to non-U.S. persons and things like that. So it keeps it within the bounds of the law and doesn't have to do this sort of contortions as well.
Two more questions. First, the term critical infrastructure is in the title of the paper, and we haven't addressed it head on yet. So, what needs to happen? What needs to happen for that designation to come down, and then what does that mean after the fact?
Yeah, I mean, I think we thought about it a little bit. There's not like this. There are these 16 categories of critical infrastructure, and they go through things like agriculture, transportation, and then financial services is one, telecommunications is another. But it has to rise to a threshold of being so systemically important, right? So, I mean, I'm sure there's tons of technology out there that probably does provide a lot of the same underlying usefulness that we have in like servers and things like that. So I don't know if you'd get to like a designation perspective, but I think that as blockchains connect more and more of our systems to each other, it probably will just get to that place. But there's CISA is what oversees critical infrastructure, and they don't have regulatory teeth. They've actually intentionally disclaimed wanting to have that at any point in time in front of Congress, because of Mike's point about like we don't want to have sticks, we just want to have carrots because it's really working. So I think it will come over time, and I think to Mike's point, organizations like SEAL are really working towards that anyway. So I don't think it's going to have to get designated at any point in time.
Yeah, and just one to underline one thing Rebecca said, like it would be, we did envision some version of like thresholds before, to the extent that you're a critical communications transmitter, that there would be any obligations to report stuff out. There would be a threshold of activity, so it's not the moment you deploy mainnet and there's 7 people catching their airdrop, you're suddenly in a reporting mechanism. Because the idea on some level is to be like the opposite of what Gary Gensler's SEC has done, which is like the moment you deploy something, everyone has to evaporate and nobody should have a hand on the wheel, or you might be liable for getting hit by a car. So I think this is like, actually we would want to have a threshold, like a sunrise version of it, that would allow people to be very much in control of communications networks without taking on more obligations, but have an opportunity to report stuff in. And then, yeah, at some point it's critical infrastructure, and just like you're going to have civil liability if you have an element. I mean, forget about the government, like just somebody loses a thing is going to go after somebody in control, that reasonably there's more obligations.
Last question is, and this is because zero knowledge is going to be such a big topic today. Either one of you or both of you, how does zero knowledge cryptography, zero knowledge proofs play into this? How should we think about the role of that technology broadly? I know that's a big question.
I mean, just briefly, I think it's critical to this. Like, very much the point of this is preventing people from being exploited, not chasing bad guys afterwards and hoping maybe we get some of it back. And so the ability to do exclusion proofs, to do threshold proofs, to do association set proofs that you'll hear from Oxbow about, and like the ability to, one, check that someone is not a listed threat actor that's been attacking people, including possibly your friends building other projects, doesn't really matter about you knowing their eye color and their height and weight. Like, you really just need to know they're not it. And so we don't need to send this information around that's just going to be exploited, like the 33 terabytes from Evolve. Like, most of those people, Evolve didn't need to know any of that stuff. I mean, some of it more for a bank, but they also just needed to know you're not on an OFAC list or whatever blacklist is coming, or blocking list from a security information like SEAL or something like that, that people have said this is a threat from who've just stolen our money. And so you don't need any of that personal information. And it's like 100 times faster too, because no one's double checking stuff. It's math.
I'll just add one point to this, which is the framework is actually meant to be evergreen. Like, zero knowledge is important, and it's going to be important for all the reasons you talk about today, but people are coming up with things, I think, that far, even expand that, right? This industry is moving so fast and so quickly. And so when people talk about something being technology neutral, this framework was really intended to be tech neutral.
Thank you so much, Michael and Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, we have one more session now, and then we have a short break. So, hey, if everyone can take their seats, we have one more session before the break. Please. In the past several years, zero-knowledge cryptography burst onto the scene, promising a future internet with radical privacy and verifiability. But what are zero-knowledge proofs? Like, really, what are they? And why should anyone who isn't already a cryptocurrency enthusiast care? Please welcome to the stage Zuko Wilcox, Head of Product at Shielded Labs.
Okay, yeah. How about this one? Hello? Oh, hi there. I'm Zuko. Thanks for coming. I don't have any slides because I want you to listen to me instead of reading, except this one. Why our society should care about zero-knowledge proofs. And it comes with a live demo, so stay tuned. Okay. Please imagine giant words in midair. I have 3 bullet points that I want you to listen to instead of read, but imagine it. The first one says, we have a big problem. And that big problem has been described a lot already about exploitation of people's private information, which pools and databases everywhere. And I'm a computer scientist, and from an information theory point of view, the root of this problem is that every time you interact with anyone, you go to the dentist's office, you look at a website, you want to look at your children's school information, everything you do currently involves leaking your personal linkable information to whoever you're interacting with. And once you do that, it keeps leaking further and further. So we have a demo to show you what I'm talking about. Where's Mike? Okay. Mike here is a citizen. This is your personal information. And I'm I'm like his dentist, the receptionist at his dentist's office, or a website that he wants to use. And the process for all of these things for all citizens as of today is you come to me to get access.
Can I please have access to your service?
All right, just
Can I please have access to your service, Zuko?
all right, just give me your information.
I'd rather not.
Okay, hold on. Well, we haven't invented zero knowledge proofs yet. So for now, if you want access to your dentist, you're going to have to give me a copy of that. And I'm going to add it to my database where it's going to get hacked. All right, hold on to that for now. So that's the current state of affairs. And I'm just going to name a couple of examples to assert that this is a big problem. This is not a small problem. But we heard about the Evolve Bank breach that just happened recently, and then a few years before that, the Office of Personnel Management, which at the time held 22 million of the security clearance records for 22 million United States federal employees, contractors, and their families and housemates. That all got stolen, almost certainly by the army of the Chinese Communist Party. And then there's an attempt to estimate out of the COVID relief funds that were handed out, which were something on the order of 1.5. There was 20% to 40% estimates of how much of that was stolen by identity theft and fraud. So that's the lower bound and the upper bound of the various credible estimates. That means somewhere between $350 billion and $500 billion that were supposed to go to American citizens for COVID relief were probably stolen by identity theft and fraud. And again, possibly some of that was stolen by the army of the Chinese Communist Party. And these are just two examples, but it happens every day, continuously. So we have a big problem, is point one. This is an unsustainable way to do things. And one more point about it is that as of now, the attempts to mitigate this problem mostly involve sending a photograph of your driver's license or your passport, or making a phone call, or maybe even a video call. You know where I'm going with this? AI. So as of 2024, I'm going to state that I think it is cheaper and easier for foreign enemies and criminal gangs to use or exploit our current KYC infrastructure than it is for the actual citizens to use it themselves because of this sea change in technology. Okay, point two, do zero knowledge proofs fix it? ? 8 years ago, I led a team of geniuses that implemented zero knowledge proofs for the first time. We did so to make the cryptocurrency Zcash. So like Signal, the secure instant messenger, is end-to-end encrypted, Zcash is end-to-end encrypted. So it's like the signal of money. And in order to do that, we had to implement zero knowledge proofs. And that kicked off an explosion of innovation. So Tornado Cash that we heard about began life as a copy of my team's source code. And now, years later, there are hundreds or 1,000 different experiments going on about how this technology and related technologies, what they can do. So this is you're kind of sailing the seas of mathematics, and you land somewhere, and you don't know if this is like rich terrain that people can colonize, or if it's a rocky atoll that's not going to do anything. You don't know until you try it. So it turns out Zcash was a habitable terrain. There's now a thriving village in Zcash town with curtains. And people are heading out in all directions. There's hundreds of experiments, some of which you'll hear about later today, about what else can we do with this. So now, for the second part of the demo, we're attempting to answer the question, can zero-knowledge proof solve it? So, hold on, I've got to, so I'm a service or website, and what I'm trying to accomplish is to not let this guy use my site. Okay? And Mike over here wants to log on. But now we've invented zero-knowledge proofs.
I'm going to submit a zero-knowledge proof instead of my personal information.
Okay, so how are you going to prove to me that you're not this guy if you're not going to let me see your personal information? Okay. All right. Okay, look away. Okay, now you can look. Now, if you're not that guy and your personal information isn't his, then you'll be able to tell me, did I swap those cards or did I not? Okay, wait, put them back. Because you might be bluffing. Those might be both the same cards, and you just guess that I swapped them. So look away. Okay, look away. Okay, now you can look again. Now tell me if I swapped those cards or if I didn't. Okay. All right, so if we do this 100 more times in a row, I'm going to be increasingly convinced that those two cards must be different, because that's the only way Mike can consistently answer my challenge, right? So the more we do this, the more convinced I get that the card he brought and the Osama bin Laden card I started with are different from each other. But the zero knowledge in zero knowledge proofs is how much extra information I'm gaining. No matter how many times we do this zero knowledge proof process, I'm not learning anything about what's on Mike's card. I'm not learning the first letter of his last name or whether he was born in the 1950s or 1960s. I'm learning zero additional information. And zero knowledge proofs can be used to prove arbitrary facts, such as he could prove to me that he's at least 21 years old or something else without revealing anything else to me about his personal identifying information. Okay, the question is, do zero knowledge proofs fix it? Question mark. But the actual answer is only partially, only part of it, because look in here. If Mike is actually Osama bin Laden and he wants to access some resource, he's just going to show up with someone else's name, right? I doubt that there is any way to prevent Osama bin Laden from exploiting other people's names or coming up with fake names or whatever. I don't know, so I'm not an expert on that. But as an expert on cryptography, I can tell you zero knowledge proofs do not do that. Right? Zero knowledge proofs do not prevent Osama bin Laden from lying or misusing identity information. So that part of the problem, zero knowledge proofs don't help with. A lot of these other experiments of people going out in all directions to explore new terrain are intended to address that problem. We'll find out. It'll take years of exploration. But what did zero knowledge proofs change about this? The honest citizen, Mike, who just wants to use his dentist or whatever, now he is doing so without leaking his private information to the dentist. So that really changes like fundamentally the flow of information in our society, if we use this technique instead of the normal technique where you give copies everywhere, then we no longer have this pooling of private information into larger and larger reservoirs of vulnerability. Okay, that's the demo. Thank you, Mike. Okay, one more point. My third bullet point is my policy plea. It is time to build. It's taken 8 years to get this far. There are 100 experiments in progress. And there's no time to waste, because as of this year, it's easier for our enemies and for criminals to use the current system than it is for honest people to use the current system. New technologies are coming whether we like it or not, and they present both risks and benefits to our entire society. And it is easier for policy to accidentally prevent the benefits. So what I want as an American is for the next generation of technologies to be developed by the free world so that we have time to learn and we have time to defend our infrastructure with new technologies before it's too late. That's all. Thank you for listening.
Hello? Oh, now we'll break till 11:15. Hey, we're going to restart shortly, so if everyone could try and make their way back to their seats, that would be great.
Everyone, we're getting started. Please come take your seats so we can get started again. Thank you. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. We're getting started now. Thank you.
Alrighty. So we're going to get started again. We've already heard a lot about zero-knowledge proofs, but zero-knowledge cryptography is what makes Tornado Cash novel. Privacy pools, which we will dive into in the next session, is the idea, which we've touched on a little bit already, that it's possible to use these same type of tools, zero-knowledge proofs, to keep known bad actors from accessing systems that feature Tornado Cash-like privacy. To talk about that with me, please welcome Zach Kolf and Amin Soleimani from Oxbow. Thank you guys so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So we're going to dive into Oxbow, which is one of the most cutting edge, and I do not use that cliche lightly, privacy projects out there. But I'm going to start by asking Amin a few questions about privacy pools, which is at least one of the big ideas behind Oxbow. So, Amin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to work on privacy pools and sort of how that led to Oxbow?
Sure, hello. Good morning.
There we go.
Amin Soleimani. I have been an Ethereum software engineer for, I don't know, close to 8 years now. We were basically jealous of Zcash in 2018 or 19, and we didn't think it made a lot of sense for all of our transactions on Ethereum to be public, and every time you pay somebody, they see your whole transaction history. And if you really want privacy, you basically run your money through Coinbase, but then that's like easily susceptible to bribing. You call up their support engineer, give me $1,000 for this guy's transaction history. And we saw that Zcash was incredible technology and wanted to have that same sort of privacy for ourselves on Ethereum. And so we implemented the second zero-knowledge proof system on the planet, and that was called Tornado Cash. When I say we implemented it, my role in this is that I was the sort of founder, summoner of this thing called Moloch DAO, which is a sort of punk rock branded nonprofit to fund Ethereum open source projects. Tornado Cash was one of them. We gave them a bunch of grant funding to build an open source privacy system. All of this is public record. I'm not saying anything here that I haven't said before, in case you're wondering. Things went sideways when North Korea hacked a video game protocol for $500 million. Axie Infinity don't ask me why they had $500 million, but then it became a big problem because they started putting the money into Tornado Cash, and that resulted in eventually US sanctions and legal action against Roman Storm and Alexei Pertsov. So this actually all played out in Las Vegas at ZCon 2, I think, years ago. And on the first day, I remember going around being like, Tornado Cash is so cool, you know, blah, blah, blah. And the day after, in the morning, we saw that it got sanctioned. And much like today, Peter Valkenburg actually got up and gave a speech about it and talked about, you know, how Coin Center could help. And Zuko, who I, you know, appreciate his contributions to cryptography too, is a complete hypocrite because in this matter he went out and said, "Hey, Zcash isn't used for any crime." But then later, when we released the privacy pools paper, he was like, "This is terrible. You shouldn't do this." And basically, the whole idea of privacy pools is that we can cryptographically demonstrate the same thing. So after the sanctions, it was kind of demoralized. We were like, "How are we going to do this? In a way that is decentralized, in a way where not a single admin has total control of the system, can steal everybody's money, put everybody's funds at risk." And it was on a, I think Vitalik had a podcast with Brian, the CEO of Coinbase, and he explained that you can actually use zero-knowledge proofs to prove that you are not some of the people who deposit into the system. And so when you withdraw from the system, you provide a proof that it says, "I'm not telling you who I am, but I'm telling you I'm not those guys." And for a system like Ethereum, that actually works because when somebody hacks a DeFi protocol, we see all the money on the chain. And so at the very least, we can prove that we are not associated with those funds. And so I once again funded a prototype through Moloch DAO, and we built this out. And after we demoed this at ETH Denver last year, I got in touch with a professor at the University of Basel in Switzerland named Fabian Schar. First, he ignored me because I'm, some like weird anarchist on Twitter or something. But eventually, he responded to my DMs and brought Vitalik into a call with him, and he had the idea. We were trying to basically recruit him. So they wrote a great paper about Tornado Cash and why it's, not only they saw the value of privacy for blockchains, and they saw Tornado Cash as something that could be critical infrastructure for humanity, and for financial systems in general. And Tornado Cash had a compliance tool, which is not brought up enough, where you could, as an individual, prove which deposit belonged to you. So you could go to the bank and be like, "This was me." Basically, the paper that he wrote suggested for policy mandating the use of that compliance tool for banks and financial institutions. So it's like, you can use Tornado Cash to protect your privacy because we think privacy is a good thing, but you have to present this proof to some sort of financial institution that says, this is who I am. But that ultimately didn't matter to the government when they sanctioned the program and threw the developers in prison. What we realized is that if this is the person making policy recommendations, we want to get in touch with them because we don't want the policies to be created without knowing what we know now, which was that you can do this sort of public dissociations. I call them dissociation proofs, membership proofs, sort of same idea. And that way, it's a lot easier to demonstrate that you are not the bad guys in a public way that doesn't require basically all the financial institutions to have a data sharing system where they say, "Oh, you check that guy, I check this guy," they're all good. And so after we talked to Fabian, he was interested in writing the paper, and he suggested it, and they were kind enough to include me as a co-author. I made some diagrams and came up with some terminology. Vitalik wrote the whole paper in a week, or like half of it, and these guys were shocked. They thought he was like some figurehead. He's just going to bless it or something. It's not Vitalik. So we published this paper, and now Zach and I have started this company, Oxbow, to basically implement this protocol. Oxbow is a company that monitors privacy systems in order to determine, maintain a whitelist of people we think are legitimate users, and essentially a blacklist of people that we think are criminal users, and keep them separated. so that the good guys can have privacy, but only amongst themselves. And I think that this is a really important thing to demonstrate, because a lot of the arguments against these systems are that they're only used for criminals. This came up at Alexi's trial in the Netherlands, where the court said there is no positive use case for something like Tornado Cash. Vitalik's, sending money to Ukraine, I guess, doesn't count. I wonder how many people, who regulate this stuff are also heroes like Vitalik and send money to Ukraine. I don't think it's very many. And this stuff is important to us also because, for example, I help participate in, Iranian activism. I have a nonprofit called Iran Unchained. Why? Because people tried to send money legally. There's sanctions, obviously, but there's exemptions to those sanctions. If you have an NGO, you can send up to 500 grand a year through, for humanitarian aid, internet infrastructure. These things are exempt. And so, but like things like GoFundMe, we're shutting down these fundraisers despite these exemptions because they don't want to deal with the compliance overhead. And so it's a matter of over-compliance. And so we basically, use cryptographic systems, to use cryptocurrency to send it without touching banks. But I have to worry about the person on the other end of that being discovered by their own government and arrested. And so the having good private systems is, I think, really important. I think that we should do what we can to build these systems within the boundaries of the law, and also try to inform the policy to make good laws. And I believe America's a good place to do it because the Fourth Amendment, in theory, protects us against illegal search and seizure.
Thank you for that. Really interesting how this company grew directly out of the Tornado Cash saga. I'm going to turn to Zach. Interested in sort of how you learned about the privacy pools idea and how you came to start working with Amin, and what was it? What is it that it has inspired you to think that this could be a company?
Yeah, sure. I think I met Amin a while back. We did Moloch DAO together, and so out of that came Tornado Cash. So I've kind of seen the whole evolution of everything and how it all works and came to fruition. So I think Oxbow is kind of like a response to the need for compliance and regulation within crypto. I don't think that anybody is trying to like break the law or like fund. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that are using it illicitly, but I mean, the people that aren't need a framework and a methodology to interact within these systems without being afraid of going to prison. So I think that's kind of the response.
And so Oxbow makes, I think Amin referred to association proofs, association sets. Oxbow makes association sets.
ASP.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, association set provider.
What exactly is an association set, and how do you create one?
Yeah, so it's like a group of people or individuals, organizations that provide lists of people that they want to interact with and ensure that those lists don't have sanction addresses or entities. It's kind of like a consensual way to opt in to transact. I mean, that can be used for consortiums. I mean, there's a lot of institutional use cases there, and that's where I think like the value comes because, I mean, there's going to have to be like Bank Secrecy Act, for example. If an institution wants to interact with another one, they need to conform to certain regulations. And I mean, that's essentially privacy. And that's kind of lacking right now in terms of the broader crypto space.
So just to make this a little bit more concrete, is there maybe a real world example? It could be something that you make up, hypothetical, to explain how you make a selection, make a decision as to who is included in an association set, and then sort of once that association set is created, then how does it get used in practice?
Yeah, so I'm having a private dinner and I want everyone to pay me for that dinner. So I'm going to create an association set. I don't want people to know who's coming to that dinner necessarily, and I don't want people to know how much they're spending, like each other, they're like one another's tabs. And so I generate that ASP, that association set rather, and everybody can opt into that.
Interesting. what are some of the technical challenges or questions around the creation of an association set that are still that Oxbow and others are still wrestling with? I know because sometimes we don't know, for example, right off the bat that that there's a bad actor out there, for example.
Yeah, I think probably identifying making sure that there's no retroactive involvement. What happens if you're you're not a criminal today, right? What if you go out and commit a crime tomorrow? How do we revoke that effectively while still maintaining privacy? I think that's probably one issue. I mean, but there's not really much legal framework at all for anything, even outside of crypto, that can account for that.
Right, I was going to ask about that. I mean, to what extent is a new legal framework necessary for Oxbow and service providers like this to thrive?
I think it's kind of just like proving intent and being able to say you're not a bad guy.
What happens if someone is included in a set mistakenly? I'm not sure if that's a possibility or if someone's excluded.
Yeah, you could just revoke that ASP, that association set, rather.
Is there any kind of legal uncertainty or questions around that right now?
I'm not a lawyer.
That's a good answer. I think for our association sets, just like make it a little more concrete. Like, the way it works is basically process of elimination, right? So if you have 6 people at your dinner party, one of them turns out to be a crook or a thief or something, the other 5 can prove that they are on the list of the 5 of them, and the 6th person can't. And so when they withdraw, they're only associated with themselves. And then the problem of revocation, like to make it more concrete, it's like if you put the money in the privacy pool and we accept it, and then you turn around and send all your money to Hamas, we're going to take your deposit out of the privacy pool, not out of the pool itself, because we don't have custody or control of the smart contract or the funds, but we're going to remove that deposit from the association set so that everybody else from that point forward isn't associated with that deposit. And further, if people who have already withdrawn based on the association set that did include you choose to or are invited to by law enforcement, they can prove against the new set, which excludes the person who we took off.
Question for both of you or whoever wants to jump on it. When you explain that, and when you explain what Oxbow does to policymakers and explain association sets to policymakers, what kind of reactions do you get? Do at least some of them buy sort of the argument that traditional KYC is not going to work in these systems and that there needs to be a different way?
Yeah, I think most response has been positive. I haven't personally encountered any negative response, but I'm assuming I probably will at some point.
The Swiss are very excited about it. The Swiss understand privacy. They're into it, for Americans, if you actually want to build one of these systems and it has this sort of relayer, the relayer doesn't have custody of the money, but according to the judge, in the Tornado Cash case, that's still enough to be considered a money services business. So if you want to be, operating in this type of system as an American business, you're going to need to KYC people both in and out, as the rules, are for, in America. And that's not actually a good privacy system, right? Like, it's almost the same as running your money through Coinbase because we have to maintain all these records. And I think basically the way that regulators operate is that they don't want to change things until they're compelled to. So I actually think there needs to be way more hacks from China or whatever, leak all the KYC data, demonstrate, like many people said before, that this is actually a national security concern. And then they will realize that we cannot protect all Americans from having their data leaked through these hacks. And so it should be Americans that have the right to defend themselves by using privacy tools. I think that's the way that this is going to work. If you remember, I mean, some of the people here were part of the cryptography wars the first time around. The government banned encryption altogether. They said it's a munition. This is a weapon because I mean, Alan Turing like won World War II because of cracking the German codes. They were like, this is really important. And so they the cases for this are kind of funny, right? It's like a professor of computer science gave a lecture about cryptography and then was arrested because he had a foreign exchange student in his class. And they said, you're exporting munitions to foreign agents. And so they tried to ban encryption until they realized that it was basically futile. The nerds took them to court. They wrote programs. They exported the cryptographic protocols on T-shirts. And I think the government tried to make this like Clipper chip or something, and the nerds basically broke it in like a day or two. And then they gave up. And then they mandated cryptography. And now every government website has HTTPS encryption, and it's very odd if you don't. And so I actually think that the evolution will go the same way, where first they fight us, and then eventually we win, but not. And our goal through this process is to try and minimize the human cost. It's one thing to overextend and like sanction Tornado Cash. We're like, hello, we'd like you to regulate things. Please make the rules explicit. And they sanction Tornado Cash. We're like, well, I guess that counts as regulating, kind of. It's an extreme form of regulation. But the part that I don't accept is throwing my friends in jail. They were not criminals. They were not associated with criminals. They were not doing any crimes. The rules for the money services businesses were not clear. That the DOJ and FinCEN have totally different interpretations of this, and so we're really hoping that we can at least help out the people who are the innovators in this, in this process.
At least obtain regulatory clarity. It's kind of hard to work in the dark.
Is the U.S. regulatory environment in particular is often criticized by the industry. Do either of you have any thoughts on that? Does it seem like it might be easier to operate in other jurisdictions? Is there anything that's going on here that's making it particularly difficult for you?
I think it's probably just a lack of clear and concise guidelines. And it is easier to work in other jurisdictions, but I'm American and I'm not going to move to another country to do my job. I mean, I served in the military, I went to Iraq, I worked in cryptography there, doing pretty much the exact same thing I'm doing now, except now somehow what I'm doing is worth more money. Wasn't getting paid much then, but here I am.
Thank you for your service. There's another sort of angle to this, which is there can be kind of this perception that this is, I guess, to use a slur, a crypto bro. This is just for crypto bros. But privacy also means confidentiality, and sophisticated investors, mainstream financial institutions are interested in confidentiality. So has Oxbow gotten traction in that sense with traditional financial institutions, and kind of how excited are folks in that space?
Yeah, so far pretty cool. We have some preliminary proof of concept work with a couple financial institutions right now. I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, this is like TLS for finance, and it's just a natural evolution, like Amin was saying. Yeah,
there's obviously financial institutions that are like, we want to do DeFi on the chain, but we don't want our competitors knowing what we're doing. How do we have privacy, right? And I think it is also actually for your everyday person, right? I mean, some people put their Venmo on public. I don't know about you guys, I don't, but typically we make fun of these people. And I think for the vast majority of people who don't want to have their Venmo on public, this is how you do it, right?
Or your bank account balance.
Yeah, you're like, why would I advertise this? Every time you make a transaction, they're like, what did you spend your money on? Every time you make a payment to someone, you're like, how much money are you making?
Final question, and then we may have some time for a question or two from the audience, depending on where we are at the end of this. But how does the privacy pools idea continue to evolve from this point? Is there necessary additional infrastructure? Are there complementary tools in development? What's the best way to think about how this technology and these systems are evolving?
So privacy pools, sort of the broad concept of using a protocol and then having distinct pools for that people can prove against for different categories of users. We are also, Oxbow is partnering with other privacy protocols so that we monitor their systems, we build lists for their systems, and allow their users to dissociate from other, potentially illicit users on their platforms. So we have our sort of B2B strategy there. We also want to build, systems for consortiums of banks, for example. Like today, really obvious sort of use cases like, if you have money on the chain and you go through an exchange, you can see which exchange it came from because all the exchange addresses are tagged. It's like Kraken 3, Coinbase, hot wallet. And so that gives me very easy insight into, okay, I need to call the guy at Kraken, bribe them to get this wallet information. And that's not great. And so if, 20 exchanges work together and pooled money into the privacy pool first, and they're like, this is a person, our rule is that you must have been KYC'd at one of our exchanges, and then you're allowed into the system. Then when you withdraw, it's like it could be one of these 20 exchanges that the money came from, and it's a lot harder to invade your privacy that way and compromise the security.
Cool. I think we do have one mic. Do we have a mic? Is there any? I think we have time for one question. Is there a question in the audience for Amin and Zach?
Got a couple.
Maybe two.
He had his hand up first. We'll probably get time for both.
I can be quick. So for the financial institutions that you're doing proof of concepts with, they understand that to produce the proofs, you're seeing the raw data, you're processing on the raw data. Do they have any interest in you meeting certain credentials, having certain certifications, certain business partnerships in order to kind of trust you with that?
Yeah, so a trend, you'll probably hear it, verified credentials. People are trying to make a sort of on-chain representations of like, this is a wallet that was KYC'd by Coinbase, or this is a wallet that was KYC'd by Kraken. And in those cases, it's a lot easier to admit them to a privacy pool. It could be that they come up with their own standard, they have their own separate pool that is just for that. They might trust each other with the data. It's not clear exactly how this will play out. Like, does Kraken need to see all of Coinbase's user data, for this to work? Ideally not. But I don't make the rules.
Well, like with Base, for example, like they use ETH attestation service, so they can just attest that one of these users has KYC'd. So I don't really need to verify exactly who that person is or identify any of their personal information. I just know that I can trust that Coinbase has KYC'd them and that they've made that attestation on chain. So that's interoperable throughout multiple networks.
Thank you. I think we'll end there. Thank you very much, Zach and Amin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another session now. Please welcome to the stage Lena M., VP of Policy at Alio, and Nikhil Raghavira, CEO and co-founder of Predicate, and Michael Riley, founding editor of Project Glitch.
So, welcome, Lena and Nikhil. We're going to continue exploring this idea of zero-knowledge cryptography being used to keep bad actors out of decentralized systems. And new blockchain network Alio is designed to do exactly that, balancing privacy and compliance. I'm really excited to have you both. And Lena and Nikhil have been working together to create rules aimed at compliance, which the Alio community has since adopted. So Lena, I want to start with you. How did you come to work on decentralized privacy, and what led you to Alio in particular?
Yeah, great question. So I joined Alio about a year ago, and before that I was at Meta for many years. I worked on the DM Libre project and other other initiatives there. And I actually never thought I'd come back to the blockchain, but here I am. And what brought me is I hadn't looked at ZK in a very long time. And when Elio approached me, I was completely taken aback by how far it'd come and how it had become productized and actually relevant for our, the next generation of the internet. So that's why I'm back.
Yeah, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what Alio is fundamentally.
Yeah, so we are an L1. We just launched our mainnet a little over a month ago, and we leverage ZK, zero knowledge proofs, to really speed up the transactions, to provide privacy by default. There's also a public component as well. And a big part of our founder's hypothesis was that there is a huge lot of transactions and entities, mostly institutional, that want to and should leverage the power of the blockchain and Web3, but really can't at this point. For many of the issues that Oxbow raised, but there is a transparency and public transparency, public access problem with data, right? So we're trying to address some of that and bring on more folks who are interested in privacy and Web3, but really couldn't access this space before.
So one way I've been thinking about this is, in some ways, Alio is kind of like an evolution from Zcash, which is focused, obviously on money, financial transactions. This is into like an evolution into more general purpose computing. Is that
Yes.
the way of thinking about it?
That's a great way to think about it. It's kind of like if Zcash had programmability built in. And there are very, very practical ways to use that. And we're very focused on really addressing those problems that can't be solved currently through the blockchain.
When we spoke before the conference, you emphasized that Alio is really focused on wanting people to build products on your network that solve sort of real world products on your network that solve real world problems. Excuse me. And I wondered if you could just kind of give us an example of that.
Yeah, a great one is just stepping back from that. Even before I joined, Alio had been working on a zero-knowledge-based digital identity product. And it's actually based on an academic paper from Ian Myers and a few folks. I think Ian just left. And it's really a way to verify who you are without exposing all of your data. You can think about it as a digital wristband that you get at concerts. Instead of constantly flashing up your birthday and address and everything on your driver's license, you get a band, and that proves you're over 21. So the idea was, how could we leverage zero knowledge to do that on the net? And we built the rails for that, and actually a product called ZPass for that. And soon after I joined, Common Sense Media, for those of you guys who have kids, I have kids, they started off as a movie rating company or nonprofit. And they've, under Jim, they've really moved towards securing the internet space for kids. And they have been wanting to build some sort of, age assurance tool for a very long time. But given their privacy ethos, given the fact that they want to protect kids and have it be a really usable product for families, they hadn't wanted to build something that further centralizes kids' data. So they didn't want potentially hundreds of millions of kids' IDs stored on AWS. They didn't want it under kind of the auspices of Meta, Google, and others. So we have a mutual advisor, and he was able to connect the dots and essentially say, oh, actually, Common Sense can build what they want to build using zero knowledge proofs and the Alio network. So one of the first kind of strategic partnerships that we got into was establishing a JV with Common Sense Media to build a company that would build these age passes for kids. And it's up and running. If you guys want to check it out, it's bandio.com. It's independently run, and we're currently, the CEO is trying to establish partnerships with different platforms and different kind of digital ID users of the H bands. So this is a great example of, I think, the blockchain and cryptography and ZPass and zero knowledge proofs being used for a real problem that all of us face in some capacity, and for a really big issue like keeping kids' spaces online safe and accessible by kids only. So we're really focused on things like that. And with that type of addressing real problems comes, I think, this responsibility of, well, how do we then think about the entire decentralized Alio ecosystem and I don't like the word compliance because it's so narrow and broad at the same time. It means so many different things, but we're really trying to mitigate some of the risk around whether it's illicit actors, illicit finance, stolen funds. Like, how do we essentially create a quote like safer space so that institutions and more companies like Common Sense Media really see the blockchain as a viable computing platform for themselves.
Yeah, and this was when you and Nikhil sort of started to work together, right?
Yep.
In Predicate. And maybe, Nikhil, you could explain a little bit your role here.
Yeah, sure. So what Predicate is essentially it enables any type of pre-transaction logic. We call it transaction prerequisites. So taking a more Web 2 example before diving into what this means from a blockchain system. So you pull up an Uber, right? You go and request an Uber ride. On the back end, what happens the moment you request an Uber ride is there's a number of pre-transaction things that are happening. It's saying, okay, so where are you located? Who are you? What's your Uber rating? Where are you trying to get to? What's traffic? What type of car you're requesting? A number of different things. All of that is pre-transaction logic. And based off of that, of course, on the back end, it is matching you with a driver that, of course, meets a number of different pre-transaction conditions. So taking that premise in mind, when you start thinking about the world of blockchains, smart contract applications, all of those things, you start realizing that more and more complexity is needed for that pre-transaction logic in anything, right? So any type of thing that you're doing, you're like, wait, there's going to be preconditions here for different types of executions. And all of this involves really some type of compute on the back end. This is where we started. And so then the big question is, so where in the world is this possibly useful? And a big one, of course, is for privacy protocols and AML and risk management. How do you ensure that certain transactions don't go through various points of centralization for what is otherwise a very decentralized network? How do you have those controls? But then more importantly, or actually maybe just as importantly, how can you have those enforced in a decentralized manner? Because otherwise, if we build a system for pre-transaction logic and it is a centralized point, as in if you're trusting me to be the one who verifies all of it, and I say, hey, look, I'm right now on this panel, I can't really go and check for you, then suddenly your check doesn't happen. I've halted every transaction through your system. So the question then is, how do you have all of this in a decentralized manner, and then have it such that even the rules, those conditions, the prerequisites are all governed by that individual that's running the application, the developer, the ecosystem even. And so that's really where Lena and I really first connected, was around this topic.
Okay. Lena, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, and I think for us as a decentralized network, we really want a marketplace of compliance and risk mitigation tools that our ecosystem is able to leverage. So that was really important to us. And when we started the work with Predicate, I mean, it was like, I see it as just first step in our journey, and Predicate has been an amazing partner. And it's really amazing to see the technical tools and technical solutions to a lot of the issues that policymakers and regulators raise coming to fruition. So that's exciting.
Yeah, you mentioned now, I think once or twice, about the risks of decentralized systems and trying to mitigate those. Yeah, just Nikhil, or whoever wants to jump in, how do you view those risks? What are they? And how did Predicate aim to address them?
Yeah, so I think the way we first approached it, and this was really cool, that Alio had a governance proposal on this, which was, hey, we're going to have this governance proposal that is passed by the ecosystem. And it was a holistic set of different requirements for bridges, for token bridges coming from Ethereum, assets coming from Ethereum over to the Alio blockchain. So here you have a governance proposal with a set of requirements. And it was a number of different things. It is, flow of funds checks from AML, for sanction actors. It's also exploit checks. So if there was an exploit and then funds are trying to come in, how do you prevent? You want a limitation there. It's rate limits, saying there should be a certain volume of funds that can be sent by any address within a 24-hour period. There's also a geolocation component. There's a number of different things that are all detailed in a governance proposal, which was then passed. And so for us, when we're building this generalized protocol, the question then is, if I'm a developer for that bridge, how do I fit all of these different requirements into my bridge? How can I do that in a way that's relatively easy? Otherwise, my experience as a developer is I have to go and build every single one of those items separately. And then, that's one bridge. And then there's a second bridge that has to go and do it independently themselves. Then there's a third bridge. They have to go and do it. So right now we're working with the first bridge, There's another bridge that's coming up later in, I believe, Q1. Axelar is another bridge as well. So how are they going to do all these things? We said, wait, there's actually a more common mechanism to be able to do all of that. So that's how we really approached it.
Okay. Yeah, and I think this is so enabling for developers and bridges, because they're, the bridges that we speak to, nobody wants to be the bridge that lets in illicit finance. I mean, I'm sure some exist, but those aren't on our network. And what we want to do is actually give them the tools to implement the governance process that our community has adopted, right? It was put up for a vote. It went through a whole decentralized voting system, and I think over 80%, 83% or so voted for it. There was very, very active debate on the merits of all the pieces, but at the end of the day, the community voted for it. And I do think, now we have this other tranche of like, okay, how do we then verify that the bridges are continuing to do this? And I think that's where Predicate and Oxbow and other technical tools come into place. We're also part of the crypto ISAC for data exchange, and we're working with Chainalysis. So I just feel more and more confident every day that there is a real ecosystem growing that's interested and focused on providing developers and layer ones like ours that are decentralized with the tools to make it safer.
Okay, I just want to drill down a little bit here. I'm curious, you mentioned the voting for the new governance structure. Who gets to vote in this system?
Yeah, currently, if you are a builder, so if you are a grantee, ambassador, actually deployed programs on our chain, you're able to vote.
Okay, and then once the rules are accepted, approved, how are they enforced?
So that's where tools like Predicate come in, how they're enforced. We also have validators that have specific responsibilities. So I do think this points out a very complicated part of implementing, first of all, even before implementing, proposing governance features, voting on it, then implementing it, then figuring out what's the enforcement mechanism that goes along. It's very complicated. And at certain points, we have debates, even between me and Nikhil, on, is that centralized? Is that a single point of failure? Or at one, until we're only a month old, our L1, so until a very robust community of independent, compliance or risk mitigation focused devs, pops up, like how much do we weigh in as a foundation? How much might Predicate or other, service providers weigh in once they're part of the ecosystem? It's a really complicated dance, and we're working through it. We definitely don't have all the answers, but it is great to see this type of conversation happening.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Nikhil?
Yeah, this balance of like decentralization is always tricky, because then you end up you occasionally end up in a position where it's like, wait, are you supposed to answer this? Am I supposed to answer this? Who's supposed to be the right person? And then you start getting into the next stage of, okay, wait, you have an answer, but from then it goes into a world of, so who is responsible for maintaining different systems as well? Yeah. And then that starts you again have to think about, wait, so how does that work? And in our case too, for the policy that is put in place, we don't even have ownership over that policy. The requirements that are being checked, we don't have ownership over that. In this case, it's the application team that has it. And that was very explicit on our end, that we're giving you the tools, here's the requirements that you are supposed to meet. You have full sovereignty over this. We're not the ones who have that. But then, of course, there's always a question of, wait, is it easier from a developer experience standpoint or a user experience standpoint if you don't have that decentralization? And so you always have to balance those things.
Well, is there a risk then that if you hand this out to the application team and say, you take it from here, I don't know, that they might decide what transaction prerequisites to apply versus, in other words, they may have different ideas about what to do than what you had intended.
They might, and that's why we have built in several layers of enforcement. So, for instance, the governance mechanism we're talking about is specific to bridges, but for the enforcement mechanism, there's validators have different responsibilities, and it goes on and on. But I do think you're getting to this. In my mind, I constantly just envision this infinite loop of implementation enforcement in a decentralized network, because at the end of the day, some entity or some smart contract, someone has to be validating that the previous thing happened, right?
Yeah.
So it is without a central entity, it is a very interesting and cryptographically and just, I think, policy-wise, an interesting problem to try to solve is when does that loop of validation stop, and how can we prove that what has happened is happening? But it is, yeah, I just envision constant loops in my head.
Yeah, we've also talked about is how much of the, like, you ideally want this to be verifiable, right? And so in this case, if it's just behind a black box, again, you don't know. And so some of these things too, when we think about flow of funds checks. So what you don't want is you don't want someone kind of unfairly put on a blacklist, and that can happen, right? And so how do you have the verifiability and then the ability for someone to appeal and say, hey, wait a second, I shouldn't be on a blacklist. So again, those are the kinds of things you also start getting into is all these different pieces. What is verifiable? What isn't? And how do you navigate that when you are having a decentralized ecosystem?
I think, even this conversation and the conversations this morning do actually point to the fact that there are thoughtful people thinking about these technical solutions. And, we're in DC, we're having, a policy-focused conversation. I do think policymakers and regulators, like, the more we can partner with them and the more we can talk to them, and the more they can actually understand that there are people building technical solutions, I think it also moves all of this forward.
Yeah. So let's come back to that example that you gave about Common Sense Media. I'm really curious about a couple of things. First, so what does it look like for the user? What does their solution, the age verification solution, look like for them?
Yeah, it's a pretty smooth experience right now. It's at bandio.com, and you essentially can have a kid verify with the school ID, or you can have an adult verify and vouch for them with their ID. There's a KYC-like kind of component to it. It's not KYC, but an equivalent. And then once you get the band, let's say you have a 8-year-old and you get them the 8-year-old band, they're able to log on and use that in different settings. So Common Sense Media has actually implemented it into their website, so kids can check movie ratings and other information, that's available to them using the band. And the idea is that, hopefully we're in conversations with, a lot of platforms, everyone from gaming to different types of social media, and even school districts to figure out, how might they use this type of product, which is very exciting.
And so that's really cool. So it's very smooth, user-friendly, presumably sort of all the people using the Common Sense Media website never know this is happening.
Yeah, I think all of us wish it was a smoother experience. It's a current beta, so hopefully it gets better. But it is. Everyone is very surprised by how smooth the process is. And I think it actually debunks a lot of ideas from some of the bigger platforms saying it's too difficult. There's a lot of kids' data that would proliferate. We don't want kids to hold the kids' data, which is a valid concern. But I think this is showing there's actually a way using cryptography, zero-knowledge proofs, to just expose the age and nothing else, and ensure that it's verified by adults.
So is it exposing the age as a number, or is it just passing a threshold?
Just passing a threshold,
yeah.
And this also, when Common Sense approached this, obviously the flip side of this is it keeps adults who shouldn't be in kid spaces out. So it's not just about giving kids freedom to roam the internet on their own. It's also keeping folks who shouldn't be in kid spaces out of those spaces.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. Yeah. And what's the feedback been like from Common Sense Media?
They've been very excited. They're half of the JV partnership, so they're very excited. I think I don't want to speak for them, but both of us see this momentum, in DC and in other capitals, with regulators being focused on age verification and child online safety. So we even at Alio see that momentum, and for us, it's such a great example of the power of ZK and the blockchain to deliver on a real problem. And I think that's why I just love this, because it's, as much as I love DeFi and other products, it's actually such a tangible issue that no other tech has really been able to deliver on, to the point where Common Sense has said no to other technologies before. So I think it's a really amazing use case for our industry.
Yeah, it is really exciting to see something that is, even in a beta form, out in the real world, potentially providing these sort of safe spaces in an area of consequence. Nikhil, did you have any closing thoughts around this?
Not directly on kind of the common sense media component, but the way we kind of see ourselves fitting in is, like, to Lena's point, it's actually talking about the use cases, right, and showing it. And so obviously we are very much an infrastructure protocol. But what we're trying to do is then empower and enable anyone else who's kind of building these other solutions, say, cool, go focus on that so you don't have to think about these other things. And so that's really kind of our long-term vision for how this entire industry works, is we have to really hone in on those actual, like, tangible use cases, and by making sure that we're able to essentially empower that for builders on Alio.
And I think Nikhil's point, actually, we talked a lot about the kid space, but the partnership that we've built with Predicate and the products they have built kind of on the Alio network, those are also very appealing for stablecoin providers and others in this space, right? Because as the Oxbow folks mentioned, like, institutions are left out of the stablecoin space on chain because all of their supply chain and who their vendors are would be on chain. There's a huge, P2P cross-border payments is what, 200 billion or so a year. Cross-border business payments are 1.5 trillion a year. There is a huge amount of TAM that our industry is leaving on the table because we haven't effectuated non-public data kind of exposure on chain. And I think Alio and solutions like Predicate and Oxbow, these technical solutions really allow us to move forward into a realm that we all want to, because we know that this technology works, and we know that this can actually make the internet and financial systems and the future financial systems really great for everyone and really efficient and lower cost. And I think we're now getting all these privacy enabling solutions coming on chain, and it's very exciting, and kudos to Nikhil's team.
Yeah, that's great. Really amazing conversation. Super exciting what you guys are doing. So thank you both for coming, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. That was a fascinating panel. And it's just been incredibly thought-provoking, I think, today to hear about all of these technologies, starting with Tornado Cash, on to Oxbow, Alio, Predicate. Really, really thought-provoking, and we're watching them develop in real time. It's obvious that this is something where there's so much active development, and that's very exciting. But it all started with Zcash, as Zuko mentioned this morning, and by proving that it was possible to deploy practical zero-knowledge proofs. This was 8 years ago, and that opened the door to a vast new range of possible interactions online. As the pioneering project in zero knowledge, there are a lot of lessons for us to learn from the Zcash project. And our next speaker, Josh Swihart, CEO of Electric Coin Company, they're the developers of Zcash, is here to share those valuable lessons. As many of you know, before joining Coinbase, I worked closely with Josh as Vice President of Strategic Alliances, and today I maintain a close connection to that project as a board member. Personally, I have very strong conviction that Zcash needs to be a part, or something like it, needs to be a part of providing economic freedom in the world, and I am thankful for Josh and his team's work and his dedication to that mission. Following Josh's talk, we hope you'll join us outside on the terrace for lunch. So thank you, and please, Josh Swihart.
Okay. Is this the clicker? This is the one? All right. So I'm gonna do a little, my session is gonna be a little bit different, I think, and it's not one that I've ever done, and there's some information that I've not ever publicly disclosed. So it'll be a little bit of fun. So I've already been introduced, so I don't have to do that. And Zcash has kind of been introduced, but just to set the stage, Zcash is really about being peer-to-peer electronic cash. This was the vision of Satoshi with Bitcoin white paper, but it was missing encryption, it was missing privacy. And so Zuko talked earlier about the group that he formed to bring this to life, and I'm honored to represent it here. But that's what our focus is on. It's like Bitcoin, but with encryption, with privacy. And so I won't go into this. We've had enough, I think, conversation about zero knowledge. But, I gotta use my clicker. That's Zcash. That's zero knowledge, what I was talking about. We're also the creators of this meme. If you've seen this meme, if you want a shirt, find me. But privacy is normal. Okay, so I want to go back in history. This is a family. It's not my family, but it's a family around a dinner table. I picked a dad that was a little bit younger and better looking, and kids that were a little bit happier than my kids are at the dinner table. And about a decade ago, I was having dinner like this with my kids, and we got a knock at the door. I was expecting this. Instead, clicker, I met Barry Burns, Special Agent Barry Burns. Agent Burns was there at my door during dinner to let me know that I was on a terrorist kill list and that my personal information had publicly been exposed. What do you do with that when that happens? What do you do with that information? I asked Agent Burns, what should I do? And he said, we can't tell you what to do. All we can tell you is that your information is out on the internet and that you're on this list. So my eyes were kind of wide open. I got very nervous and anxious because I knew what that meant. Because I had built surveillance systems in the past, and I knew what kind of information was out there and available. I wondered if it started here, if this is where I got on the list. So back in my past, I was a program manager for something called Project Falcon. Project Falcon was a ground station and a situational awareness system for the UAE government. So we built that system so that the UAE could monitor the military operations of their neighbors, of people around them. And they used all kinds of fancy technologies. We use all kinds of fancy technologies to do things like edge detection, to track movements and deltas of assets across the Middle East over time. Now, my architect on that system went on to form another company, and he used that same technology for marketing campaigns. All right, so there's a guy with a fish. Anytime an image is taken from a satellite or from a drone, all kinds of information is available. It's not just what's in the picture, right? It's all the metadata about it, what's changed since the last picture. When was it taken? How was it taken? What angle was it taken? When you've got a picture, when you take a picture of an airplane, you've got information on what kind of airplane it is, what the payload looks like, how far it can fly, who the pilots are, where they live. So a long time ago, we had this capability, and we used this capability. Then I went and joined my friend at this company prior to Agent Burns showing up at my house to use the same stuff to be able to create marketing campaigns. Because in this picture, we can tell that there's somebody holding a fish, and we can do facial recognition to determine who it is. And we can query across the internet to see what else they might be interested in, where they like to travel. We can figure out if they might have disposable income, and we can use that information to target somebody with ads. So it started getting really creepy. We started aggregating more and more data. At the time that we shut the program down, which we did, we had aggregated data on about 30 million Americans, scraping across about 24 or a little over 24 different sites to be able to get this rich kind of information. Eventually, what happened is that potential employers were very interested in this information. And we had a large contractor reach out to us to determine whether or not somebody that's applying for a job at their company, which political party they might be affiliated with, what their political leanings might be. Because they told me, we feel like there's certain kind of employees that do better here than others. So we shut that program down and we focused on something else. So this might not, I'm guessing nobody, I don't know if anybody, has anybody else had this experience? With Special Agent Burns? Just me? But the reality is that your data is being mined and your data is being tracked, and it has been for some time. And I think you know it. Fast forward a couple years from then is kind of where I found crypto. Different kind of use case. I first got interested in it really because it was kind of interesting from capital formation side. But I had done some work. I had lived overseas in India for a while and had done some work in the slums of Mumbai and had developed a friendship with a community leader named Shankar. And Shankar reached out to me and he said, there's been a fire in the slum and I'm trying to get food and blankets to people in our community. Can you help? And Shankar was unbanked. So if we're unbanked, what do? We use Western Union to transfer money. But the reality is that Western Union shut me down. We don't know. I have no idea why they shut me down. I had no information. I had no recourse. All I knew is that I had a friend in a community that I loved that was hurting and I could not send money. And in the middle of this kind of emergence of this kind of knowledge of crypto in my world, I thought, well, Bitcoin fixes this, right? But the reality is it does not. Because I was thinking about the risks that I'm placing my friend in if I send him money if I send him money. If I send Shankar money and he puts that in his wallet and he goes to exchange it with somebody else, some other counterparty he does not know, that counterparty, can they see the balance of his wallet? Yes, they can. Can they see that transaction history? Absolutely, yes, they can. So it's not safe. And so I went looking for a solution. And there's this emerging project called Zcash, led by this guy Zuko, that people kept telling me about. And I went on knocking on Zuko's door for many months before he finally agreed to hire me. But he did, and he gave me some responsibility for kind of external commercial and regulatory relations. And within, I would say, a week, I think that, maybe it was 2 weeks, the first exchange listed or delisted Zcash. There we go. I didn't expect this right out of the gate, but that's what I found. So I'm going to talk through some of the headwinds that we've had experienced over the years since we've been doing this, and then some of the second order effects of those things. So in some cases, nation-state actors have banned regulated entities from supporting privacy tokens generally. Sometimes that's misunderstood. They do it indirectly. In the case of FSA in Japan, for example, they put rules so restrictive on the exchanges that they were forced to delist privacy coins. It was an outright ban. In South Korea, it's very different. In some cases, the pressures came from the banking sector or payments rails, where things were happening behind the scenes, where the exchange delisted, but they were forced to list because some pressure that happened downstream. And in some cases, governments, including the US, have used shadow regulations to invade citizens' privacy and get Zcash either removed from an exchange or to the point where a commercial entity is not willing to support privacy because of the stress and the pressure it puts on their business. We spent a considerable amount of time with lawyers and compliance teams around the world to kind of understand what this is and what's going on. We've met with regulators, and some, as Mike Mosier mentioned this morning, have been very friendly and warming and engaging. And some, it's been very intimidating. We've met with the Five Eyes. We've met with the White House, with OECD. We've met with other folks in Treasury. We've had kind of side conversations with DOJ. And again, while some of those have felt friendly, some of those have not felt friendly. And the specific requests have been made to include backdoors into the Zcash code so that the US government could spy, could have access to information. And we've talked about why that's not possible. But when you're called into the White House and told, it would be in your best interest, you ought to think about, as a normal citizen, right? It's very intimidating, it's very nerve-wracking. And then to follow that, we have these cases. Tornado Cash, Samurai, developers are arrested, thrown in jail, don't understand the rules. We've had to put processes in place as it relates, as a result of this. Today, there's something called light client infrastructure. There's light wallet infrastructure that runs on the Zcash network that we don't know who the actors are. I mean, we know who some of the actors are, but we don't know who their allegiances are to, that have a certain amount of information about Zcash users. We can't run the infrastructure, because if we run the infrastructure, we're at risk of getting thrown in jail. We've also had to implement a process where if I get wind that something may be happening with the US government towards Zcash, I've got a 2-day plan to shut everything down. I have to take time and energy, freak out employees, all of this kind of stuff, to say, like, we have to be at the ready, because we can't guarantee that the US is going to be our friend tomorrow, even if we're abiding by the rules that we understand today. Okay, I can't see it here. Another challenge, if you're in government, that's like really important, is narrative framing. So many in power have frequently and incorrectly vilified privacy by associating it with criminals and not with the positive use cases. Many in the crypto community, sadly, have latched onto the same thing, going in front of Congress and talking about the importance of transparency, what it allows law enforcement to do and the benefits that it provides, and it does provide it, but it continues that kind of pandering continues to reinforce that. And then we've seen actors co-op narratives, and I'm calling out former Commissioner Giancarlo a little bit here. He's part of something called the Digital Dollar Project. And former Commissioner Giancarlo talks about privacy and how important privacy is for national security for a US-based stablecoin. And the way that we're going to do that and we're going to allow compliance is we're going to actually allow the federal government to run nodes in the middle, so that if they get subpoenaed, the idea is that they get subpoenaed, that they could reveal the information. So it sounds nice in concept, but the reality is that you have government, you have state-based actors that are running infrastructure who do have access to citizens' private information. And we've seen what happens with our telecommunications and what has happened with NSA when that kind of power becomes available. I know I'm a little bit over. Okay. Next slide. I'm trying. Okay, so I just want to touch on a couple of the second order effects, or a few of the second order effects. I'll go through these very, very quickly. But this is the stuff that is maybe not seen, but is happening in our industry as a result of these aggressive actions that have been taken by policymakers and regulators around the world. Innovation will go underground. There's already people that are trying to figure out now that they've been in a public sphere, like, how do they remove themselves from the public sphere and continue to start to do this development without being at risk or as at risk of doing this work? So instead of having normal people like me, come in and meet with agencies and talk through this stuff, people are going to go underground. People are going underground because they're scared, not because they're doing anything wrong. Foreign governments and hackers will spy on US citizens and organizations. If the US government can see the transaction graph of US citizens, because this information is on a public chain, so can North Korea, so can Russia, so can hackers around the world. All of that information is available to anybody. And if you saw past my history, when you start to correlate that data with what's publicly on chain, with what's publicly available in social spheres, what does that mean? What does that mean when those foreign governments are able to see your full financial history? Any data stored will be accessed and exploited. Zuko touched on this earlier. If the data's out there, it's going to be hacked. Any backdoored code will be quickly forwarded or subverted. I think somebody else said that as well. It's free and open source code. It's published out there on the internet. If somebody feels like there's any risk of it being exploited, any kind of backdoor, it's just going to be forked. Championing surveillance technology will lead to worldwide anti-democratic abuse. I talked to a US-based chain surveillance company, and they were like, oh yeah, we're talking to the government of Myanmar about being able to surveil their people. It's like, the government of Myanmar, is that a good government? Like, does our government approve? It's like, do you approve? He said, money talks. The reality is that these entities make a ton of money by being able to surveil, and it's not just happening here, it's happening worldwide. We can't just assume it's just for good. This was what Peter talked about. Peter's been talking about this for a long time. It's like this fundamentally, the act of creating and innovating, we have to be able to do in private spaces or it will stop. And this is core to the values of who we are as US citizens, to what was founded on. If we don't have privacy, we will lose this. And then finally, AI and public change will democratize surveillance. So, you thought this was bad. Stew on this for a second. I don't know if you can read it. It says, who is the owner of this Bitcoin address? Please tell me where they live, information on their immediate family members, and where they like to vacation. This isn't far away. It was building this stuff decades ago. Now we're adding an AI layer on top of it. What is that going to mean? This is probably, at our current pace, maybe 3 to 5 years out. And this data, it's AI plus open blockchain, real-time data availability, plus persistence. It can't go away. We can't shut this chain down. Once your information is etched on a chain, it's forever etched on the chain. You can't just remove it. You don't have like this kind of GDPR kind of thing that we have in the EU where you can remove your data. I went through and I had a bunch of my data scrubbed after Agent Burns showed up at my door. You can't do that with a public blockchain. All right, so I'm concerned about the future. You should be too. At some point, you may not have experienced this, but you'll experience something like it. I'm very hopeful, though, as well. Projects like this, what's happening, what Paul put together today, and you all are participating in, gives me hope. We're having these conversations. We're trying to find reasonable solutions. There's some politicians in Washington, D.C. that are speaking out and openly about some of the risks of things like CDBCs and surveillance and privacy and the needs for privacy. So I do have hope. Cryptocurrencies have really ushered in this generation's Gutenberg moment. It will democratize money. The world has changed. It's just fundamentally changed. Distribution of information was critical for speech, but so was pseudo-anonymity for innovation, including this innovation of this wonderful place that we have called the United States of America. And as we democratize money, we must not stamp every transaction with a person's identity. To truly realize the magic of electronic cash and to protect human liberties, we must be able to speak anonymously and transact privately. Thank you for being part of the light, and let freedom reign.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Paul, can you hear me? Hi. Oh, how many Pauls and how many mics do we have here today? There are quite a few. All right. Why did you put the host in the broom closet? Well, because he can't hear us, so we want to make sure he doesn't hear me. Now I can't. Let's see. Let me make sure you're using the right mic. Are you getting levels from? We heard you on his laptop. Were you able to hear him in there? No. Why not? Input 2 is routed. Yeah. I guess I'll look this way and say hi on this camera. Okay, so you've got me on podium, like, good. Can you hear me okay? No?
Hi.
Hi. Let's just make sure that we don't get any echoes or feedback in the room and stuff like that when you go ahead and talk. Yeah, if you just count down from like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, something like that.
Shashank, do you hear us? Can you say something to us, Shashank? Let's hear your voice. Make sure it's coming through nicely.
Hey, great to be here.
Great. I'm going to see if I can pin you and spotlight you for everyone so that you can show up on the big screen. We're working on that. Why don't you just test your audio again so they can check levels?
Hello, hi everyone. Great to be here.
Great.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, it looks good here now.
I think that's about as good as we can get it for right now. Because we got 5 minutes or so. So.
Okay. All right, we're going to go on mute, Shashank. We'll be back with you.
All right.
I'll do your readout. Hi, everyone. Please take your seats. We're going to get started. Thank you. Okay, it's time to begin the second half of the DC Privacy Summit. We hope you enjoyed your lunch. It was a beautiful day outside. We are very thankful for that. Don't forget that immediately following the program, we will have a reception on the penthouse here, and again, to be able to enjoy this beautiful weather outside. It's a beautiful penthouse if you haven't seen it. We also want to thank the sponsors of that reception, the Filecoin Foundation, Radius, and the Farcaster Law and Policy Channel. So we have some great partners at this event. To kick off our afternoon sessions, I would like to welcome my boss, and the person who really made all of this possible is the Chief Policy Officer of Coinbase, Faryar Shahzad.
Hi, everyone. I'll just be on for a couple of minutes, but I wanted to thank everybody for being a part of this event. I want to congratulate Paul and the Coinbase Institute, together with the folks at Project Glitch, for putting this event together. You know, for all of us who are involved in policy issues or in crypto, you know, we spend an inordinate amount of time focusing on kind of the issue of the moment, which is the regulation of crypto exchanges and the issuance of stable coins. And you've all sort of seen all the twists and turns and the energy being spent to try to get legislation done. And, you know, a lot of us are hopeful that we'll make progress with that, and that this election will end up being, you know, the kind of the biggest crypto election we've ever had, and a much better crypto Congress next year, and all those things that we hope for. But events like this help remind us that the reason we've all gotten into the space is because of the potential of a decentralized, democratized world, essentially a value layer to the internet that fulfills the promise of what the internet was intended to do, which is to create a much more democratized system. But on the way there's some very hard issues that get resolved, and probably at the center of that, there's nothing more important than privacy. And so when Paul came up with the idea of having a privacy summit, we were all very excited about it, because we need to have exactly this kind of discussion. And some of it turns on some of the policy things we talk about what the solutions are. But the real ultimate enduring and resilient solution to getting policy right on the privacy space is the innovators that have been a part of this day to day, to talk about the applications that they're building, the solutions to real life applications that once they're explained, people are intuit quickly and understand that this is really an enhancement to the status quo and something we need to protect. And as in the course of protecting it, sort of recenter ourselves in terms of our assumptions about what the presumptions are regarding privacy, government surveillance, all those hard issues that we've sort of hard baked into a place that merits some challenge and reassessment, just like the Zcash discussion did earlier. I think things like that are really important to force us to recenter in important ways. So we're really proud of what the Institute and Paul have done today. We're going to do a lot more of these sort of discussions through the Institute, where we essentially take a bit of a different angle, look at a little bit of a longer horizon as to what the issues are, and then bring the community in a way that helps explain kind of what's at stake, why it's important, why we all need to kind of reset our thinking a bit, and why there's a potential for a really exciting future in front of us. I'm particularly proud of Paul's the diversity of voices that he's brought here, and I think we're really lucky to have Carol House from the White House and friends from Congress and others who are going to be a part of this discussion today. And so I think the goodwill that shows just by participating in this is really exciting. So we appreciate you all being here. Now, my formal job was to introduce the next panel. Coinbase obviously is a stakeholder in its own right on the issue of privacy, and we obviously have very important and complex protocols and policies around how we approach privacy. And so what we've arranged is what's going to be a really good discussion on privacy with two of our senior privacy folks who are going to be a part of a discussion that's going to happen right after this. So I'll sort of turn the stage over to them and to Paul, and thank you all for being a part of this discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Faryar. Again, thanks for investing in this event, and thanks to my employer, Coinbase, for being so supportive and having actually some of our most important team members here. Asha is here. Asha Shankar is here. She is the senior manager of Coinbase's privacy program. And on Zoom, and we can bring that up, please, we have Shashank Agarwal. He's the blockchain security research engineering manager at Coinbase. And he would love to be here in person, but actually his team and the entire security team at Coinbase are having an offsite meeting. I had to pull Asha out of it, so I'm very thankful that she was able to come and be here with us in person. And Shashank, thank you for joining us on Zoom. And I would like to also say that we're very fortunate to have Casey Wagner, senior reporter at Blockworks, to facilitate this discussion. So Asha, Casey, please come up.
Hello. Thank you. Yes, thank you, and thank you to Coinbase. I'm excited to be here. When Mike and Paul first mentioned this panel to me, I was really excited. I feel like with Coinbase, everyone's aware of the KYC privacy situation, but when we think about Coinbase's privacy team, I feel like that's something that we really don't talk about as much. So I'd like to kind of start with an introduction. Asha, maybe you can go first. What are your teams working on? What does your day-to-day look like? What can you kind of tell us about this privacy department at Coinbase?
Thanks, Casey. Everyone, my name is Asha Shankar. I lead privacy for Coinbase. Among the number of things that I do, one is just working with our legal team to understand various privacy regulations out there and ensuring that the products and services that Coinbase releases are being compliant with those. Interestingly, a lot of privacy regulations that are there today, whether it is CPRA, CCPA, state regulations like DC, Colorado, or even international regulations like GDPR, are very Web 2 centric. So it's almost like fitting a round peg in a square hole. So we have to constantly kind of figure out what that means for a company like Coinbase. So that's one of the key challenges that we are running into today.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get into some of these key differences between Web 2 and Web 3. Shashank, can you start with an introduction?
Hi everyone, I'm sorry to be there. I'm really excited to be part of this. I'm part of the blockchain security team here at Coinbase, and we do a number of things. We are responsible for all the on-chain development that happens at Coinbase. So in particular, the security of the base blockchain, security of the products, on-chain products that we are building here, smart wallets, base names, and we also have assets that list on the exchange. We want to do that in a secure manner. Then we have the off-chain side of blockchain, where we have wallets, node services, staking services. So we want them to be secure as well. So there's a big variety of things that my team works on.
Great. Asha, I wanted to start with you. When thinking about privacy on Web3, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you think exist in the space? And I'm also curious if you can tell us about the current regulatory environment. Are there regulations that guard what can be on chain in terms of data?
Yeah, the very basic nature of blockchain, the immutability and transparency really requires us to rethink how the traditional privacy requirements have to be evaluated on chain. Let me just take a few examples. Right to deletion. And what is right to deletion? Essentially, if a company is processing a customer's personal data, a customer can reach out to the company and say, hey, I want you to delete the data that you have about me. In your traditional Web 2 environment, you can hard delete data or you can apply access controls, but in Web 3, that's really not feasible. Similarly, retention. What is retention? Retention is another requirement from various privacy regulations where we are ensuring that we're only keeping the data for a relevant time period. And it changes. Like example, compliance data is something that's retained for a longer period compared to a marketing data. In Web 2, that can be easily implemented, saying, hey, based on the data used, you can apply retention policies. That changes when you look at Web 3. Or another example is transparency or purpose limitation. Transparency, I would say, in Web 2, once a customer has provided their data to a company, they have less visibility into where the data is stored, so on and so forth, versus blockchain offers more transparency in where their data exists, what data exists. On the other hand, purpose limitation is a right that customers have, where essentially companies have to ensure that if there's data that's being gathered for a specific purpose, like say for KYC, is only being used for KYC, can be used for marketing. It is easier to enforce that in Web 2, but on blockchain, once the data is there on the chain, it can be used for anything and by anyone. So these traditional privacy concepts really have to be revisited for blockchain. Unfortunately, we have to still adhere to, being a financial institution, Coinbase has to adhere to these privacy principles, which, again, as I said, is very Web 2 centric.
You mentioned personal data. How do you determine? So personal data is subject to regulation when it's on chain. How do you determine what is personal data? Can you give some examples?
The most obvious ones are like name, email address, social security numbers, but there are some non-obvious ones too, like even wallet address, if we are able to associate that to a user, becomes a personal data. IP addresses, device ID. So these are all things that on the first go you might think that it's not personal data, but by means of association becomes personal, and hence privacy regulations become applicable for them.
Definitely. Shashank, I want to bring you in. When we're thinking about how to enhance on-chain privacy, how are you thinking about it? How is Coinbase thinking about it? What options exist? What challenges are there?
Yeah. On-chain privacy is a complex problem, and maybe I'll make some high-level points and then talk in a bit more detail. So we know that blockchains are, like, by design, they're public. All transaction data, state data, everything is public. And when we think about hiding things, providing privacy for users, what exactly should we hide? On one end, we have simple things like you could hide user balance, you could hide user identity, but you could also hide smart contract code, the state of contracts, or a combination of these things, right? And the more you try to hide, the more complex and expensive the solution becomes. And there's also the question of interoperability. Interoperability within the contract for blockchain and interoperability with other chains. So for instance, if we have an encrypted asset, would it still be possible to use it with existing DeFi protocols? Likely not, right? So that's why privacy is hard on chain. And we can try to solve privacy. We have various options to like bring privacy into blockchain at various levels. For example, we could do something at the wallet level. We could maybe consider generating stealth practices. But at the same time, smart wallets, they're really popular these days and they're kind of picking up really. In smart wallets, the secret keys are device bound. You can only do a very small set of operations on the secret key. You really only sign transactions with the secret key. But to implement something like stealth addresses, you may want to do more with the secret key, right? Which is not directly possible. Another option is do something at the protocol level, like maybe have shielded transactions, private contract execution, or something else of that sort. But that might require, if you have an existing blockchain, you might have to significantly redesign the blockchain for that to work. And at that point, you might even consider rolling out a new chain altogether. But that would have its own challenges where the liquidity comes from. How would you bridge funds to that chain, bridge funds out of that chain, stuff like that. And lastly, you could also consider doing something at the application level, at the dApp level, and you could consider providing privacy in a very specific context. But then that might limit interoperability with other apps. So there are various options how you can like solve privacy, but they all come with various challenges. And one thing that also is useful to keep in mind is that blockchains tend to be decentralized or are decentralized or like aspire to be decentralized, right, as much as they can. And when we try to solve for privacy, ideally we do not want to bring in elements of centralization. So I guess that's what I have to say.
Hey, Casey, a couple more things that I'll add. So while we are looking at what privacy protocols make sense for Coinbase, we already heard a lot of folks earlier today who talked about different protocols that already exist. In the interim, I think our focus has also been on user education, both outside externally to our customers as well as internally within Coinbase. again, forums like this, we're also ensuring that we have appropriate privacy policies, appropriate disclosures, and with the release of Base, which is our L2 network, and more developers who are developing dApp products on Base, it becomes more important that the developer documentation kind of calls through what does it mean to have personal data. And we try to kind of bucket it into 4 categories just for being really simplistic so that our engineers and our product teams can understand that just because the data is on chain and it's available, it does not exclude from it becoming personal. So we would have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis on whether it's personal or not, because if it is personal, then these privacy regulations become applicable.
And how do you go about that? It really is a case-by-case basis, so that sounds time-consuming and difficult.
So that's where there are multiple data discovery solutions where it's not just identifying your traditional what personal PII or personal data, but it's also looking for other elements where by means of association could become personal. We also evaluate smart contracts that Coinbase is developing to see, hey, is there or there isn't any personal data that is getting processed via those smart contracts. Also including reviews of the different data types that can be posted on chain. So until we have more clear guidance on, from a regulatory point of view, until there's more clear guidance on how some of these basic privacy requirements will fit on a blockchain, companies like Coinbase have to ensure that we are doing something that can be rolled forward easily, because once the data is on chain, it's there forever.
And you mentioned regulation. Looking ahead, what kind of policy or legislative proposals might impact some of this stuff in the future? How are you thinking about that? It sounds like there's a lot of gaps. What gaps exist? Are you seeing progress in any way?
As I said, at least as of today, there aren't any blockchain-centric privacy regulations. They're all Web 2. There are some elements which have, EU recently released the EU AI Act, so which talks about which has more guidance around use of AI models and especially use of personal data in AI models. I'm hoping that more and more regulations start to, at least the regulations which are going for a revamp are considering blockchain and catering to a blockchain community.
And Shashank, I'm curious to hear from you. What regulatory gaps exist? What challenges do these create?
And Casey, just for full transparency, neither Shashank nor me, we're not lawyers, so we're just folks who are trying to work with our legal team to ensure that whatever the regulation is, how can we technically implement it, evaluating technical feasibility of what does privacy mean on chain. So.
Yeah.
I don't think I have more to add to that.
I guess in terms of, you mentioned some scenarios. What are the challenges? And, are you limited in what you can implement based on the current regulatory environment?
So I was talking to somebody earlier, and I say, privacy on chain is really a wide spectrum. One end of the spectrum is your regulators and agencies who want more traceability, who want more transparency, and the other end is a customer who wants to ensure that their data is private. I know it's only a dream right now that someday, cryptocurrency is going to be equivalent to fiat, but even now, if I'm able to easily trace transactions on chain, say I use crypto to buy something in a grocery store, then I went to a doctor, I made my purchase, all that information is on chain. And as I said, there are a lot of technologies like this Arkham technology, which essentially where you can enter a wallet address and it's not hard to kind of trace a transaction all the way through. So that's where companies have to take a stance on where are we in the spectrum, and our technical solutions have to support that.
Definitely. We have a few minutes left. I want to kind of get back to Coinbase as the focus. What can you tell us about what you're working on? What are you excited about in the privacy Web3 space? How are you guys thinking about solving some of these issues?
Shashank, do you want to talk more about Base?
So Base launched probably about a year ago, and we started to think about privacy on Base. Like I said, you can bring privacy in many different ways, and there are challenges associated with that. So we want to have a long-term strategy and a short-term strategy of how to address privacy. So we're keeping all the options open at the moment. and we'll see which one provides the right balance, basically, between, there are several entities involved here, and we will have to strike the right balance for a privacy solution to be successful.
And yeah, Aisha, just forward-looking, what are you excited about?
So Coinbase as a company, we offer like 3 different types of products, if you were to say. So consumer products are like your traditional Coinbase.com, where users can go interact on dApps, purchase crypto. We also have institutional products where institutions who have to be on the who have to transact on crypto use our products. And the last is what developer products, which is what Shashank mentioned. Base is our L2 network, where we're seeing an exponential growth in developers who are developing dApp products, and that's the hardest problem to solve. Saying how, like, if there is a developer who's developed a dApp and the consumer's personal data gets exposed for some reason, it's not. While Base is a very decentralized product, at the end of the day, it would still come back to Coinbase saying, hey, I provided my data on Base to this dApp and my data was exposed. So how are we going to protect our customers in an environment where the data is so decentralized? It's a hard problem to solve, and that's where our focus is on right now.
Definitely, and really focusing on users. Both of you, actually, what should users understand when interacting on chain in terms of privacy? I know we talked a little bit about some of the misconceptions that exist, but what are your best practices, your best advice?
As I mentioned, it's just having the awareness that once the information is there on the chain, it's going to stay forever. I know there are products that we offer, like on-chain verify, where somebody was talking about it earlier, where you can use the information that you were KYC'd by Coinbase and use that attestation across other entities. So in that instance, their information is, they are voluntarily providing the information that they were KYC verified by Coinbase. Our effort is to ensure that when customers provide the information, they have knowledge of what it actually means. Right now, it's primarily through, as I said, sessions like this, more awareness to our customers in terms of live pop-ups with information on what that means. So that's essentially how we're trying to tackle it.
Yeah, lots of discussions about attestations today for sure. Shashank, what about you? What are some of the best practices? What should users be aware of?
Yeah, so there's of course some standard stuff out there. Your wallet, everything on the blockchain is public, so like all your wallet activity can even be tracked back to an actual person. So be careful about how you transact online. Yeah. And there's many other ways in which you could kind of reveal information about you. Not just your on-chain activity, but the way you ramp onto a blockchain, the way you offboard from a blockchain, how you build your assets. There's so many different things that people do on the chain, the kind of protocols they participate in, and if they use crypto for real-world transactions, that could also reveal information about them. If they use crypto to buy coffee at a coffee shop, right? So they have to be like very careful. All of this information is being recorded on the chain, so they have to be very careful on the kind of on-chain activity they choose to participate in.
And sorry, just to add to, this is probably getting more into the security space, but there is actually an increase in the number of phishing attacks that we've seen, especially since the onset of use of blockchain. Like there's more awareness on which wallets have how much dollar amount, and so they're easy targets. So just having providing more awareness on like these phishing attacks.
Yeah, definitely. This session is called Coinbase's Long View. We have 30 seconds left. Any final thoughts?
Blockchain is here to stay. It's just on everybody else to see how, like, especially for our regulations, to see how can we make this more, what do you say? I wouldn't say legitimate, but like how do we make this so that it's easier to demonstrate to everyone that, blockchain is not for illegal activity. There's a ton of good that's coming out from this. How do we make this more regulated?
Shashank, final thoughts?
yeah, on-chain privacy is very, very important, but also needs to be solved in the right way. And we are working on it and really excited about it.
Great. Thank you both so much. Shashank, we'll let you get back to your team, but we appreciate you joining us virtually.
Thanks, Casey.
We've talked a lot about zero-knowledge proofs today, but where do they come from? Why exactly is there so much excitement about them? And where is all of this headed? Please welcome to the stage Justin Thaler, research partner at A16Z Crypto, and Mike Orcutt, editor of Project Glitch, who will discuss the science of zero-knowledge cryptography.
Okay. This is on, right? Okay, cool. Great. Thanks for sticking around with us. We have talked a lot about zero-knowledge proofs, like Lucy just said, and now we are sitting with one of the world's foremost experts on the subject. Thanks for being with us, Justin. I was hoping that you could start off by just explaining what you do at A16Z and what the larger goal is for the cryptographic research team there.
Yeah, sounds good. This is on. Yeah, so A16Z research is about 2-3 years old now. There's, depending on who you count, there's like 5 to 8 of us, I guess. It's a mix of economists, cryptographers, some people who work on distributed systems and consensus. And then we also have close relationships with some political scientists who study things like on-chain governance, can kind of speed run experiments in, how humans can organize themselves, that used to take decades or centuries or something like that. And formal verification people to try to get bugs out of smart contracts and stuff. So, blockchain brings in many different disciplines, and the research group kind of reflects that. So we kind of have a dual purpose. There's sort of the obvious one of if any of the portfolio companies run into technical problems, we can potentially help with that, or maybe steer the roadmap so they don't run into the roadblocks in the first place. If the investment team just needs some understanding of whether proposals they're seeing are technically feasible or not, we can help. Maybe the more interesting thing kind of externally is there's also an engineering team, about 7-ish people as well. And the research team and engineering teams work closely together to build open source tooling for the whole ecosystem. And the general, ethos is, the firm is sufficiently invested in the entire blockchain space that it's sort of going to succeed or fail, whether blockchain as a technology succeeds or fails. So if we can kind of push forward the whole ecosystem, we would like to do that. That's kind of it's both selfish and altruistic at the same time. So those are the things we work on.
Cool. So we're going to dive kind of into some deep science in this panel, so a little bit of a change from some of the other ones. But in order to do that, we're going to rewind back in time to the early 2010s. Justin, you were studying theoretical computer science in grad school, and little did you know that you were actually studying a part of a technology from the future that's called a snark. And we have that spelled out right here. Justin, what the hell is a snark?
Yeah, so a snark is a cryptographic protocol that lets any untrusted party prove that they know some data. Cryptographers often call that data the witness, satisfying some property. So I'll give maybe 2 examples. I'll start with one. Let's say you want to prove to the Ethereum blockchain that you know 20,000 transactions, they've all been digitally authorized by the initiator of the transactions, and they're all valid. None of them are, sending more money than exists in the initiating account and all that jazz. A snark would let anyone, kind of prove to, say, the Ethereum blockchain that they actually know all those transactions and that all those transactions are valid, and that, processing those transactions kind of advances the state of the world from state A to state B. And in that way, the blockchain itself doesn't have to do all that processing that untrusted person did, and it doesn't matter that, the Ethereum blockchain doesn't trust them because there's the snark proof, can't be forged. So succinct here just means the proof is short and fast to check. Non-interactive means it's just like a computer file that you can post on the blockchain for anyone in the world to check, or you could attach it to an email or post it on a website or something. And then argument of knowledge just means it's secure. So that, there is basically no way at all to find a convincing proof of a false statement. So if I hand you a snark proof, you don't have to trust me at all. If the proof passes the checks out, what I'm saying must be true. That's the snark.
And so you were studying in grad school in the early 2010s, you were studying something called the sum check protocol. And we're going to come back to that in a little bit more depth, but just really quickly,